"My dear lord," replied Paganel, "I will translate the document for you, according to my third interpretation, and you shall judge. I only make two suggestions. First, forget as far as possible the previous interpretations. And next, although certain passages will seem to you forced, and I may translate them wrongly, still, remember that they have no special importance. Moreover, the French document serves as the basis of my interpretation, and you must consider that it was written by an Englishman who could not have been perfectly familiar with the idioms of our language." So saying, Paganel, slowly pronouncing each syllable, read the following. On the 27th of June, 1862, the brig Britannia of Glasgow foundered after a long struggle agony in the South Austral Seas on the coasts of New Zealand. 2 sailors and Captain Grant succeeded in landing aboard her. Here continuellement a proie to a cruel destitution indigence. They cast this document into the sea at longitude and latitude 37 degrees 11. Come to their assistance or they are lost. Paganel stopped. His interpretation was admissible, but although it appeared as probable as the other, still it might be as false. Glenarvan and the Major therefore no longer attempted to dispute it. However, since the traces of the Britannia had not been encountered on the coasts of Patagonia or Australia, the chances were in favor of New Zealand. "Now, Paganel," said Glenarvan, "will you tell me why, for about 2 months, you kept this interpretation secret?" "Unanimity in despair." "Because I did not wish to give you vain hopes. Besides, we were going to Auckland, which is on the very latitude of the document." "But afterwards, when we were taken out of our course, why did you not speak?" "Because, however just this interpretation may be, it cannot contribute to the captain's rescue." "Why, Paganel?" "Because, admitting that Captain Grant was wrecked on the coast of New Zealand, as long as he has not made his appearance for 2 years since the disaster, he must have fallen a victim to the sea or the savages." "Then your opinion is," asked Glenarvan, "that we might perhaps find some traces of the shipwreck, but that the seamen of the Britannia have perished." "Keep all this silent, my friends," replied Glenarvan, "and leave me to choose the time for telling this sad news to the children of Captain Grant." Chapter 58. A Cry in the Night. The crew soon learned that Ayrton's disclosures had not thrown light upon the situation of Captain Grant. The despair on board was profound, for they had relied on the quartermaster, who, however, knew nothing that could put the Duncan on the track of the Britannia. The yacht therefore continued on the same course, and the only question now was to choose the island on which to leave Ayrton. Paganel and Captain Mangles consulted the maps on board. Exactly on the 37th parallel was an island, generally known by the name of Maria Theresa, a lone rock in the midst of the Pacific, 3,500 miles from the American coast and 1,500 miles from New Zealand. No ship ever came within hail of this solitary isle. No tidings from the world ever reached it. Only the stormbirds rested here during their long flights, and many maps do not even indicate its position. If anywhere absolute isolation was to be found on Earth, it was here, afar from the ocean's traveled highways. Its situation was made known to Ayrton, who consented to live there, and the vessel was accordingly headed towards the island. 2 days later, the lookout hailed land on the horizon. It was Maria Theresa, low, long, and scarcely emerging from the waves, appearing like some enormous sea monster. 30 miles still lay between it and the yacht, whose prow cut the waves with such speed that soon the island grew distinct. The sun, now sinking towards the west, defined its outlines in glowing light. Several slight elevations were tinged with the last rays of the day. At 5 o'clock Captain Mangles thought he distinguished a faint smoke rising towards the sky. "Is that a volcano?" he inquired of Paganel, who, with his telescope, was examining the land. "I do not know what to think," replied the geographer. "Maria Theresa is a point little known. However, I should not be surprised if its origin was due to some volcanic upheaval." "But then," said Glenarvan, "if an eruption created it, may we not fear that the same agency will destroy it?" "That is scarcely probable," answered Paganel. "Its existence has been known for several centuries, and this seems a guarantee for its continuance." "Well," continued Glenarvan, "do you think, Captain, that we can land before night?" "Another artificial volcano?" "No, certainly not. I ought not to endanger the Duncan in the darkness, on a coast that is not familiar to me. I will keep a short distance from land, and tomorrow at daybreak we will send a boat ashore. At 8 o'clock Maria Theresa, although only 5 miles to windward, appeared like a lengthened shadow, scarcely visible. An hour later, quite a bright light like a fire blazed in the darkness. It was motionless and stationary. That would seem to indicate a volcano, said Paganel, watching it attentively. However, replied Captain Mangles, at this distance we ought to hear the commotion that always accompanies an eruption, and yet the wind brings no sound to our ears. Indeed, observed Paganel, this volcano glows but does not speak. You might say that it throws out intermittent flashes like a lighthouse. You are right, continued Captain Mangles, and yet we are not on the illuminated side. Ha, cried he, another fire, on the shore this time, see, it moves, it changes its place. He was not mistaken. A new light had appeared, that sometimes seemed to go out, and then all at once flash forth again. Is the island inhabited? Asked Glenarvan. Evidently by savages, replied Paganel. Then we cannot abandon the quartermaster here. No, said the major, that would be giving even savages too dangerous a present. We will seek some other deserted island, resumed Glenarvan, who could not help smiling at Mac Nab's delicacy. I promised Ayrton his life, and I will keep my promise. At all events, let us beware, added Paganel. The New Zealanders have the barbarous custom of misleading ships by moving fires. The natives of Maria Theresa may understand this deception. Bear away a point, cried the captain to the sailor at the helm. Tomorrow, at sunrise, we shall know what is to be done. At 11 o'clock the passengers and the captain retired to their cabins. At the bow the first watch was pacing the deck, while at the stern the helmsman was alone at his post. In the stillness Mary and Robert Grant came on deck. The two children, leaning upon the railing, gazed sadly at the phosphorescent sea and the luminous wake of the yacht. Mary thought of Robert's future, Robert thought of his sisters, both thought of their father. Was that beloved parent still living? Yet must they give him up? But no, what would life be without him? What would become of them without his protection? What would have become of them already, except for the magnanimity of Lord and Lady Glenarvan? The boy, taught by misfortune, divined the thoughts that were agitating his sister. He took her hand in his. Mary, said he, we must never despair. Remember the lessons our father taught us. Courage compensates for everything in this world, he said. Let us have that indomitable courage that overcomes all obstacles. Hitherto you have labored for me, my sister, but now I shall labor for you. Dear Robert, replied the young girl. I must tell you one thing, continued he. You will not be sorry, Mary. Why should I be sorry, my child? And you will let me do as I wish. What do you mean? Asked she anxiously. My sister, I shall be a sailor. And leave me, cried the young girl, clasping her brother's hand. Eulogy and threnody. Yes, sister, I shall be a sailor, like my father and like Captain John. Mary, my dear Mary, he has not lost all hope. You will have, like me, confidence in his devotion. He has promised that he will make me a thorough and efficient sailor, and we shall seek our father together. Say that you are willing, sister. What our father would have done for us it is our duty, or mine at least, to do for him. My life has but one object to which it is wholly devoted, to search always for him who would never have abandoned either of us. Dear Mary, how good our father was. And so noble, so generous, added Mary. Do you know, Robert, that he was already one of the glories of our country, and would have ranked among its great men if fate had not arrested his course? How well I know it, answered Robert. Mary pressed her brother to her heart, and the child felt tears dropping upon his forehead. Mary, Mary, cried he, it is in vain for them to speak or to keep silent. I hope still, and shall always do so. A man like our father does not die till he has accomplished his purpose. Mary Grant could not reply. Sobs choked her utterance. 1,000 emotions agitated her soul at the thought that new attempts would be made to find her father, and that the young captain's devotion was boundless. Does Mr. John still hope? Asked she. Yes, replied Robert. He is a brother who will never forsake us. I shall be a sailor, shall I not, sister, a sailor to seek my father with him. Are you willing? Yes, said Mary, but must we be separated? You will not be alone, Mary, I know. John has told me so. Lady Helena will not permit you to leave her. You are a woman and can and ought to accept her benefits. To refuse them would be ungrateful. But a man, as my father has told me 100 times, ought to make his own fortune. But what will become of our house at Dundee, so full of associations? We will keep it, my sister. All that has been well arranged by our friend John and Lord Glenarvan, who will keep you at Malcolm Castle like a daughter. He said so to John, who told me, "You will be at home there, and wait till John and I bring back our father." "Ah, what a joyful day that will be!" cried Robert, whose face was radiant with enthusiasm. "My brother, my child," exclaimed Mary, "how happy our father would be if he could hear you. How much you resemble him, dear Robert. When you are a man you will be quite like him." "God grant it, Mary," said Robert, glowing with holy and filial pride. "But how shall we pay our debt to Lord and Lady Glenarvan?" continued Mary. "Oh, that will not be difficult," answered Robert, with his boyish impulsiveness. "We will tell them how much we love and respect them, and we will show it to them by our actions." "That is all we can do," added the young girl, covering her brother's face with kisses, "and all that they will like, too." Then, relapsing into reveries, the two children of the captain gazed silently into the shadowy obscurity of the night. However, in fancy they still conversed, questioned, and answered each other. The sea rocked the ship in silence, and the phosphorescent waters glistened in the darkness. But now a seemingly supernatural event took place. The brother and sister, by one of those magnetic attractions that mysteriously draw the souls of friends together, experienced at the same instant the same curious hallucination. "Methought," the billows spoke. From the midst of these alternately brightening and darkening waves, they thought they heard a voice issue, whose depth of sadness stirred every fiber of their hearts. "Help, help," cried the voice. "Mary," said Robert, "did you hear?" And raising their heads above the bulwarks, they both gazed searchingly into the misty shadows of the night. Yet there was nothing but the darkness stretching blankly before them. "Robert," said Mary, pale with emotion, I thought like you." At this moment, another cry reached them, and this time the illusion was such that these words broke simultaneously from both their hearts. "My father, my father." This was too much for Mary Grant. Overcome by emotion, she sank senseless into her brother's arms. "Help," cried Robert. "My sister, my father, help." The man at the helm hastened to Miss Grant's assistance, and after him the sailors of the watch, Captain Mangles, Lady Helena, and Lord Glenarvan, who had been suddenly awakened. "My sister is dying and my father is yonder," exclaimed Robert, pointing to the waves. No one understood his words. "Yes," repeated he, "my father is yonder. I heard his voice and Mary did too." Just then Mary Grant recovered consciousness, and looking wildly around, cried, my father is yonder." The unfortunate girl arose, and, leaning over the bulwark, would have thrown herself into the sea. "My lord, madam," repeated she, clasping her hands, "I tell you my father is there. I declare to you that I heard his voice issue from the waves like a despairing wail, like a last adieu." The positiveness of disbelief. The unfortunate girl arose, and, leaning over the bulwark, would have thrown herself into the sea. Then her feelings overcame the poor girl, and she became insensible. They carried her to her cabin, and Lady Helena followed, to minister to her wants, while Robert kept repeating, my father is there, I am sure of it, my lord." The witnesses of this sorrowful scene perceived at last that the two children had been the sport of an hallucination. But how undeceive their senses, which had been so strongly impressed? Glenarvan, however, attempted it, and taking Robert by the hand, said, "You heard your father's voice, my dear boy." "Yes, my lord, yonder in the midst of the waves he cried, 'Help, help.'" "And you recognized the voice?" "Did I recognize it? Oh yes, I assure you, my sister heard and recognized it too. How could both of us be deceived? My lord, let us go to his rescue. A boat, a boat." Glenarvan saw plainly that he could not undeceive the poor child. Still, he made a last attempt, and called the helmsman. "Hawkins," asked he, "you were at the wheel when Miss Grant was so singularly affected?" "Yes, my lord," replied Hawkins. "And you did not see or hear anything?" "Nothing." "You see how it is, Robert." If it had been his father, answered the lad with irrepressible energy. "He would not say so. It was my father, my lord. My father, my father." Robert's voice was choked by a sob. Pale and speechless, he, too, like his sister, lost consciousness. Glenarvan had him carried to his bed, and the child, overcome by emotion, sank into a profound slumber. "Poor orphans," said Captain Mangles. "God tries them in a terrible way." "Yes," replied Glenarvan. "Excessive grief has produced upon both at the same moment a similar effect." "Upon both," murmured Paganel. "That is strange." Then, leaning forward, after making a sign to keep still, he listened attentively. The silence was profound everywhere. Paganel called in a loud voice, but there was no answer. "It is strange," repeated the geographer, returning to his cabin. "An intimate sympathy of thought and grief does not suffice to explain this mystery." Early the next morning the passengers, and among them were Robert and Mary, for it was impossible to restrain them, were assembled on deck. All wished to examine this land, which had been scarcely distinguishable the night before. The principal points of the island were eagerly scanned. The yacht coasted along about a mile from the shore, and the unassisted eye could easily discern the larger objects. Suddenly Robert uttered a cry. He maintained that he saw two men running and gesticulating, while a third was waving a flag. "Yes, the flag of England," cried Captain Mangles when he had used his glass. "It is true," said Paganel, turning quickly towards Robert. "My lord," exclaimed the boy, trembling with excitement, "my lord, if you do not wish me to swim to the island, you will lower a boat." "Ah, my lord, if you please, I do wish to be the first to land." "A compensation for all." No one knew what to say. Were there 3 men, shipwrecked sailors, Englishmen, on that island? All recalled the events of the night before and thought of the voice heard by Robert and Mary. Perhaps, after all, they were not mistaken. A voice might have reached them. But could this voice be that of their father? No, alas, no. And each, thinking of the terrible disappointment that was probably in store, trembled lest this new trial would exceed their strength. But how restrain them? Lord Glenarvan had not the courage. "Lower the boat," cried he. In a moment this was done. The 2 children, Glenarvan, Captain Mangles, and Paganel stepped into it, and 6 earnest and skilled oarsmen sped away towards the shore. At 10 yards therefrom, Mary uttered again the heartrending cry. "My father!" A man was standing on the beach between 2 others. His form was tall and stout, while his weather-beaten yet pleasant countenance betrayed a strong resemblance to the features of Mary and Robert Grant. It was, indeed, the man whom the children had so often described. Their hearts had not deceived them. It was their father, it was Captain Grant. He heard his daughter's cry. He opened his arms and supported her fainting form. Chapter 59. Captain Grant's Story. Joy does not kill, for the long-lost father and his recovered children were soon rejoicing together and preparing to return to the yacht. But how can we depict that scene, so little looked for by any? Words are powerless. The joys of reunion. As soon as he gained the deck, Harry Grant sank upon his knees. The pious Scotchman, on touching what was to him the soil of his country, wished, first of all, to thank God for his deliverance. Then, turning towards Lady Helena, Lord Glenarvan and their companions, he thanked them in a voice broken by emotion. While on their way to the yacht, his children had briefly told him the story of the Duncan. A man was standing on the beach between 2 others. His form was tall and stout. How great a debt of gratitude did he feel that he owed this noble woman and her companions, from Lord Glenarvan down to the lowest sailor, had not all struggled and suffered for him. Harry Grant expressed the feelings of thankfulness that overflowed his heart with so much simplicity and nobleness, and his manly countenance was illumined by so pure and sincere a sentiment that all felt themselves repaid for the trials they had undergone. Even the imperturbable Major's eye was wet with a tear that he could not repress. As for Paganel, he wept like a child who does not think of hiding his emotion. Captain Grant could not cease gazing at his daughter. He found her beautiful and charming, and told her so again and again, appealing to Lady Helena as if to be assured that his fatherly love was not mistaken. Then, turning to his son, he cried rapturously, "How he has grown, he is a man." He lavished upon these 2 beings, so dearly loved, the 1,000 expressions of love that had been unuttered during long years of absence. Robert introduced him successively to all his friends. All had alike proved their kindness and good wishes towards the two orphans. When Captain Mangles came to be introduced, he blushed like a young girl, and his voice trembled as he saluted Mary's father. Lady Helena then told the story of the voyage, and made the captain proud of his son and daughter. He learned the exploits of the young hero, and how the boy had already repaid part of his obligation to Lord Glenarvan at the peril of his life. Captain Mangles' language to Mary and concerning her was so truly loving, that Harry Grant, who had been already informed on this point by Lady Helena, placed the hand of his daughter in that of the noble young captain, and turning towards Lord and Lady Glenarvan said, "My lord and lady, join with me to bless our children." It was not long before Glenarvan related Ayrton's story to the captain, who confirmed the quartermaster's declaration in regard to his having been abandoned on the Australian coast. "He is a shrewd and courageous man," added he, "but his passions have ruined him. May meditation and repentance lead him to better feelings." But before Ayrton was transferred to Tabor Island, Harry Grant wished to show his new friends the bounds of his habitation. He invited them to visit his house and sit for once at his table. Glenarvan and his companions cordially accepted the invitation, and Robert and Mary were not a little desirous to see those haunts where their father had doubtless at times bewailed his fate. A boat was manned, and the whole party soon disembarked on the shores of the island. A few hours sufficed to traverse Captain Grant's domain. It was in reality the summit of a submarine mountain, covered with basaltic rocks and volcanic fragments. When the shipwrecked seamen of the Britannia took refuge here, the hand of man began to control the development of nature's resources, and in 2 years and a half, the captain and his companions had completely metamorphosed their island home. The visitors at last reached the house, shaded by verdant gum trees, while before its windows stretched the glorious sea, glittering in the rays of the sun. Harry Grant set his table in the shade and all took seats around it. Some cold roast meat, some of the produce of the breadfruit tree, several bowls of milk, 2 or 3 bunches of wild chicory, and pure, fresh water formed the elements of the simple but healthful repast. Paganel was in ecstasies. It recalled his old idea of Robinson Crusoe. The ruling passion still strong. "That rascal Ayrton will have no cause to complain," cried he in his enthusiasm. "The island is a paradise." "Yes," replied Harry Grant, "a paradise for 3 poor sailors whom heaven sheltered here. But I regret that Maria Theresa is not a large and fertile island, with a river instead of a rivulet, and a harbor instead of a coast so exposed to the force of the waves." "And why, Captain?" asked Glenarvan. "Because I would have laid here the foundation of that colony that I wish to present to Scotland." "Ah," said Glenarvan, "then you have not abandoned the idea that has made you so popular in your native land." "No, my lord, and God has saved me, through your instrumentality, only to permit me to accomplish it. Our poor brothers of old Caledonia shall yet have another Scotland in the New World. Our dear country must possess in these seas a colony of her own, where she can find that independence and prosperity that are wanting in many European empires." "That is well said, Captain," replied Lady Helena. "It is a noble project and worthy of a great heart, but this island—" "No, madam, it is a rock, only large enough to support a few colonists, while we need a vast territory rich in all primitive treasures." "Well, Captain," cried Glenarvan, "the future is before us. Let us seek this land together." The hands of both men met in a warm clasp, as if to ratify this promise. All now wished to hear the story of the shipwrecked sailors of the Britannia during those 2 long years of solitude. Harry Grant accordingly hastened to satisfy the desires of his new friends, and began as follows. Harry Grant set his table in the shade, and all took seats around it. A Tale of Industry. It was on the night of the 26th of June, 1862, that the Britannia, disabled by a 6 days' tempest, was wrecked on the rock of Maria Theresa. The sea was so high that to save anything was impossible, and all the crew perished except my 2 sailors, Bob Learse and Joe Bell, and myself, and we succeeded in reaching the coast after many struggles. The land that we thus reached was only a desert island, 2 miles wide and 5 long, with a few trees in the interior, some meadow land, and a spring of fresh water that, fortunately, has never ceased to flow. Alone with my 2 sailors, in this quarter of the globe, I did not despair, but placing my confidence in God, engaged in a resolute struggle. Bob and Joe, my companions and friends in misfortune, energetically aided my efforts. We began, like Robinson Crusoe, by collecting the fragments of the vessel, some tools, a little powder, several weapons, and a bag of precious seeds. The first weeks were very toilsome, but soon hunting and fishing furnished us subsistence, for wild goats swarmed in the interior of the island, and marine animals abounded on its coast. Gradually, our daily routine was regularly organized. I determined our exact situation by my instruments, which I had saved from the shipwreck. We were out of the regular course of ships, and could not be rescued except by a providential interposition. Although thinking of those who were dear to me, and whom I never expected to see again, still I accepted this trial with fortitude, and my most earnest prayers were for my 2 children. Meantime we labored resolutely. Much of the land was sown with the seeds taken from the Britannia, and potatoes, chicory, sorrel, and other vegetables improved and varied our daily food. We caught several goats, which were easily kept and had milk and butter. The breadfruit tree, which grew in the dry creeks, furnished us with a sort of nourishing bread, and the wants of life no longer gave us any alarm. We built a house out of the fragments of the Britannia, covered it with sails, carefully tarred, and under this shelter the rainy season was comfortably passed. Here many plans were discussed, and many dreams enjoyed, the best of which has just been realized. At first I thought of braving the sea in a boat made of the wreck of the vessel, but a vast distance separated us from the nearest land. No boat could have endured so long a voyage. I therefore abandoned my design, and no longer expected deliverance, except through a divine interposition. Ah, my poor children, how many times, on the rocks of the coast, have we waited for ships at sea? During the entire period of our exile, only 2 or 3 sails appeared on the horizon, and these soon to disappear again. 2 years and a half passed thus. We no longer hoped, but still did not wholly despair. At last, yesterday afternoon, I had mounted the highest summit of the island, when I perceived a faint smoke in the west, which grew clearer, and I soon distinctly discerned a vessel that seemed to be coming towards us. But would she not avoid this island, which offered no landing place? Ah, what a day of anguish, and how my heart throbbed! My companions kindled a fire on one of the peaks. Night came, but the ship gave no signal for approach. Deliverance was there, and should we see it vanish, I hesitated no longer. The darkness increased. The vessel might double the island during the night. I threw myself into the sea to swim to her. Hope increased my strength. I beat the waves with almost superhuman energy and approached the yacht. Scarcely 30 yards separated me when she tacked. Then I uttered those despairing cries which my 2 children alone heard, for they were no illusion. I returned to the shore, exhausted and overcome by fatigue and emotion. It was a terrible night, this last one on the island. We believed ourselves forever abandoned, when at daybreak I perceived the yacht slowly coasting along the shores. Your boat was then lowered. We were saved, and thanks to the divine goodness of heaven, my dear children were there to stretch out their arms to me. The document once more. Harry Grant's story was finished amid a fresh shower of kisses and caresses from Robert and Mary. The captain learned now, for the first time, that he owed his deliverance to that hieroglyphic document that, 8 days after his shipwreck, he had enclosed in a bottle and confided to the mercy of the waves. But what did Jacques Paganel think during this recital? The worthy geographer revolved the words of the document 1,000 ways in his brain. He reviewed his 3 interpretations, which were all false. How had this island been indicated in these damaged papers? He could no longer restrain himself, but, seizing Harry Grant's hand, cried, "Captain, will you tell me what your undecipherable document contained?" At this request curiosity was general, for the long-sought clue to the mystery would now be given. "Well, Captain," said Paganel, "do you remember the exact words of the document?" "Perfectly," replied Harry Grant, "and scarcely a day has passed, but memory has recalled those words upon which our only hope hung." "And what are they, Captain?" inquired Glenarvan. "Tell us, for our curiosity is great." "I am ready to satisfy you," continued Harry Grant, "but you know that, to increase the chances of success, I enclosed in the bottle 3 documents, written in 3 languages. Which one do you wish to hear?" "They are not identical, then," cried Paganel. "Yes, almost to a word." "Well, give us the French document," said Glenarvan. "This one was spared the most by the waves, and has served as the principal basis for our search." "This is it, my lord, word for word," answered Harry Grant. On the 27th June, 1862, the brig Britannia of Glasgow was lost 1,500 leagues from Patagonia, in the southern hemisphere. Carried by the waves, two sailors and Captain Grant reached Tabor Island. "Ha!" interrupted Paganel. "Here," resumed Harry Grant, continually a prey to a cruel destitution, they cast this document into the sea at longitude 153 degrees and latitude 37 degrees 11. Come to their aid, or they are lost." At the word Tabor, Paganel had suddenly risen, and then, controlling himself no longer, he cried, "How Tabor Island? It is Maria Theresa." "Certainly, Mr. Paganel," replied Harry Grant, "Maria Theresa on the English and German, but Tabor on the French maps." At this moment, a vigorous blow descended upon Paganel's shoulder. Truth compels us to say that it was from the Major, who now failed in his strict habits of propriety. "A fine geographer you are," said MacNab in a tone of badinage, "but no matter, since we have succeeded." "No matter," cried Paganel, "I ought never to have forgotten that twofold appellation. It is an unpardonable mistake, unworthy of the secretary of a geographical society. I am disgraced." When the meal was finished, Harry Grant put everything in order in his house. He took nothing away, for he was willing that the guilty convict should inherit his possessions. They returned to the vessel, and, as he expected to sail the same day, Glenarvan gave orders for the quartermaster's landing. Ayrton was brought on deck, and found himself in the presence of Harry Grant. "It is I, Ayrton," said he. "Yes, Captain," replied Ayrton, without betraying any astonishment at Harry Grant's appearance. "Well, I am not sorry to see you again in good health." The passengers could see the quartermaster, with folded arms, standing motionless as a statue on a rock and gazing at the vessel. "It seems, Ayrton, that I made a mistake in landing you on an inhabited coast." "It seems so, Captain." "You will take my place on this desert island. May heaven lead you to repentance." "May it be so," rejoined Ayrton in a calm tone. Then Glenarvan, addressing the quartermaster, said, "Do you still adhere, Ayrton, to this determination to be abandoned?" "Yes, my lord." "Does Tabor Island suit you?" "Perfectly." "Now listen to my last words. You will be far removed from every land and deprived of all communication with your fellow men. Miracles are rare, and you will not probably remove from this island where we leave you. You will be alone, under the eye of God, who reads the uttermost depths of all hearts, but you will not be lost, as was Captain Grant. However unworthy you may be of the remembrance of men, still they will remember you. I know where you are, and will never forget you." "Thank you, my lord," replied Ayrton simply. Such were the last words exchanged between Glenarvan and the quartermaster. The boat was ready, and Ayrton embarked. Captain Mangles had previously sent to the island several cases of preserved food, some clothes, tools, weapons, and a supply of powder and shot. The abandoned man could therefore employ his time to advantage. Nothing was wanting, not even books, foremost among which was a Bible. The hour for separation had come. The crew and passengers stood on deck. More than one felt the heart strangely moved. Lady Helena and Mary Grant could not repress their emotion. "Must it then be so?" inquired the young wife of her husband. "Must this unfortunate be abandoned?" "Farewell, a long farewell." "He must, Helena," answered Glenarvan. "It is his punishment." At this moment the boat, commanded by Captain Mangles, started. Ayrton raised his hat and gave a grave salute. Glenarvan and the crew returned this last farewell, as if to a man about to die, as he departed, in a profound silence. On reaching the shore, Ayrton leaped upon the sand, and the boat returned. It was then 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and from the upper deck the passengers could see the quartermaster, with folded arms, standing motionless as a statue on a rock and gazing at the vessel. "Shall we start, my lord?" asked Captain Mangles. "Yes, John," replied Glenarvan quickly, with more emotion than he wished to manifest. "All right," cried the captain to the engineer. The steam hissed, the screw beat the waves, and at 8 o'clock the last summits of Tabor Island disappeared in the shadows of the night. Chapter 60. Paganel's Last Entanglement. 11 days after leaving Tabor Island, the Duncan came in sight of the American coast and anchored in Talcahuano Bay. 5 months had elapsed since her departure from this port, during which time the travelers had made the circuit of the world on this 37th parallel. Their efforts had not been in vain, for they had found the shipwrecked survivors of the Britannia. The Duncan, having taken in her necessary stores, skirted the coasts of Patagonia, doubled Cape Horn, and steamed across the Atlantic. The voyage was very uneventful. The yacht carried a full complement of happy people. There seemed to be no secrets on board. A mystery, however, still perplexed MacNab. Why did Paganel always keep hermetically encased in his clothes and wear a comforter over his ears? The Major longed to know the motive for this singular fancy. But in spite of his questions, hints, and suspicions, Paganel did not unbutton his coat. At last, 53 days after leaving Talcahuano, Captain Mangles descried the lighthouse of Cape Clear. The vessel entered St. George's Channel, crossed the Irish Sea, and passed into the Frith of Clyde. At 11 o'clock they anchored at Dumbarton, and early in the afternoon the travelers reached Malcolm Castle, amidst the hurrahs of their tenantry and friends. Thus it was that Harry Grant and his 2 companions were rescued, and that John Mangles married Mary Grant in the old Cathedral of St. Mungo, where the Rev. Mr. Morton, who 9 months before had prayed for the rescue of the father, now blessed the union of the daughter with one of his deliverers. It was arranged that Robert should be a sailor, like his father and brother-in-law, and that he should continue the contemplated project of the former, under the munificent patronage of Lord Glenarvan. But was Jacques Paganel to die a bachelor? Certainly not, for after his heroic exploits, the worthy geographer could not escape celebrity. His eccentricities and his abilities made him much talked of in Scotland. People seemed as though they could not show him enough attention. Just at this time an amiable lady of 30, none other than the Major's cousin, a little eccentric herself, but still agreeable and charming, fell in love with the geographer's peculiarities. Paganel was far from being insensible to Miss Arabella's attractions, yet did not dare to declare his sentiments. Early in the afternoon, the travelers reached Malcolm Castle, amidst the hurrahs of their tenantry and friends. The Major accordingly undertook the part of Cupid's messenger between these 2 congenial hearts, and even told Paganel that marriage was the last blunder that he could commit. But the geographer was very much embarrassed, and strangely enough, could not summon courage to speak for himself. "Does not Miss Arabella please you?" MacNab would say to him. "Oh, Major, she is charming," cried Paganel, "1,000 times too charming for me, and if I must tell you would please me better if she were less so. I should like to find a defect." "Be easy," answered the Major, "she has more than one. The most perfect woman always has her share. Well then, Paganel, are you decided?" "I do not dare." "But my learned friend, why do you hesitate?" "I am unworthy of her," was the geographer's invariable reply. At last, one day, driven desperate by the irrepressible Major, Paganel confessed to him, under the pledge of secrecy, a peculiarity that would facilitate his identification, if the police should ever be on his track. "Bah!" exclaimed the Major. "It is as I tell you," persisted Paganel. "What matter, my worthy friend? Is that your opinion? On the contrary, you are only more remarkable. This adds to your personal advantages. It makes you the inimitable individual of whom Arabella has dreamed." And the Major, preserving an imperturbable gravity, left Paganel a prey to the most acute anxiety. A short interview took place between MacNab and the lady, and 15 weeks after a marriage was celebrated with great pomp in the chapel of Malcolm Castle. 15 weeks after a marriage was celebrated with great pomp in the chapel of Malcolm Castle. The geographer's secret would doubtless have remained forever buried in the abysses of the unknown if the Major had not told it to Glenarvan, who did not conceal it from Lady Helena, who communicated it to Mrs. Mangles. In short, it reached the ear of Mrs. Albinett and spread. Jacques Paganel, during his 3 days' captivity among the Maoris, had been tattooed from head to foot, and bore on his breast the picture of an heraldic kiwi with outstretched wings, in the act of biting at his heart. This was the only adventure of his great voyage, for which Paganel could never be consoled or pardon the New Zealanders. In spite of the representations of his friends, he dared not go back to France, for fear of exposing the whole geographical society in his person to the jests and railleries of the caricaturists. The return of Captain Grant to Scotland was welcomed as a cause for national rejoicing, and he became the popular man of Old Caledonia. His son Robert has become a sailor like himself, and, under the patronage of Lord Glenarvan, has undertaken the plan of founding a Scottish colony on the shores washed by the Pacific Ocean. The end.